Hi, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, you must have heard me say many times when we're doing these kinds of little sessions about the books that I read and how interesting some of them are, and I like to impart a little of that information to you. Now, you must have heard me talk about this book. It's called The Source Field Investigations, and there it is. And you can see this poor battered book that I have has been, well, it's been battered. I can tell you, I've read this book and read it because it's so full of incredible research information. Now, there is a man who was the early pioneer of the polygraph. Now, probably the polygraph is something that will never affect most of us, except that it is in common use. And a lot of the reason that it's in use is because of this one man, and his name is Cleve Backster, and he was working in, let me see, he was working very late 40s, and he developed a model for using the polygraph, which is actually still used today. He said, by 58, Baxter had freed up time to begin intensive polygraph research, and he developed the first standardized system for numerical evaluation of polygraph charts, which is still being used today. All right, well, I know that's very dry, I know, but this man, he actually began back in the 50s. He began working for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in America, and he was part of a team that they would send out if they heard of any interrogation. Let me just here. They were prepared to travel to any foreign location to analyze the possible use of unusual interrogation tactics, including his original areas of concern, which were mainly hypno-interrogation and narco, in other words, drug interrogation. Well, this is not, don't say anything about the waterboarding and other torture types of interrogation that they had. But he went on and he used a polygraph. Well, he actually continued from 59. He moved to New York City, and he opened and continued to operate a commercial polygraph business. So you could call this guy, and he would come in, or one of his operatives would come in, and they would interview your applicants for very sensitive security jobs. And he had quite a bit of expertise to offer. So that was in 59 that he moved to New York. Well, 7 years later, after working heavily in this particular clandestine industry in a way, it says 7 years later, Baxter struck gold. Now, in 1966, an event occurred which was about to expand the entire focus of my research through a kind of paradigm shift in my own awareness. I've been involved in the use of the polygraph on humans for 18 years when this happened. And what happened was, he had been doing some research, and he'd been working all night, and he was taking a break about 7 in the morning or something, and he was in there, and what had happened was that his secretary had bought a couple of plants, and he wasn't a plant type of person, but he was in there, and he looks over at these plants and he thinks, I wonder if it's possible that there is some kind of reaction to the polygraph from a plant. So he does no more than hook up part of the leaf of a plant, a cane plant, which he has there in his office on his desk. So he hooks this thing up to the polygraph, and it surprised him because it didn't have this straight line. I mean, let's face it, we think that a plant is limited, but we don't think of it as having a life as such in our terms. And so he was very surprised, and he wondered if he could apply the normal method of operation to interrogating a plant. I know that this sounds incredibly ridiculous, but he thought, well, what if I just do to the plant what I do to humans? Now, as an example of what they do to a human taking a polygraph test is to ask a question such as, did you fire that shot that was fatal to John Smith? If they did commit the crime, the question would threaten their well-being and produce a reaction that would show up on the charts. So he tried doing a couple of things which he thought might endanger the plant. He dipped leaves into a cup of hot coffee and nothing happened. Anyway, after there was hardly any response. Then he tapped one of the leaves with his pen, and there...
Sorry, darling. Sorry,
my
darling.
dear wife, is there anything else you would like to inflict on me? So he tried to get a reaction from the plant. So he said, what I thought that I would do is, I thought I'll get a match and burn the plant's electroded leaf, the one that he had hooked up. At that time the plant was about 15 feet away from where I was standing. The only thing that was new was what occurred with this thought. It wasn't that he did anything. He didn't speak to the plant and say, I'm thinking seriously about burning your rear end, okay? He didn't do that. But what happened next would change the history of science forever, and the impact still has not reached out to common public awareness. People don't know about this. The very moment that the imagery of burning that leaf entered his mind, the polygraph recording pen moved rapidly to the top of the charts. In other words, it went... So he says, the plant recording showed dramatic excitation. To me, this was a powerful, high-quality observation. I must state that on February the 2nd, 1966, at 13 minutes 55 seconds into the chart recording, my whole consciousness changed. I then thought, gee, it's as though the plant can read my mind. Now, he still got this graph of the cane plant. I think it's a Dracena or Dracana cane plant, having an electrical reaction right as he thought of burning one of its leaves. And there's the now that is the actual graph, and you can see that it was bumbling along there along the bottom, not producing terribly exciting stuff. And then suddenly he thought of burning the plant. The thought, and boy, that thing just went right to the top of the thing. So as the plant continued to have what would be considered an enormous panicked reaction, Baxter then went and got matches from his secretary's desk. So he said, when I returned, the plant was still showing highly visible reaction. So anyway, it was the fact that the plant apparently was demonstrating that it was connected in thought. So the plant was thinking, or if it wasn't thinking, it was actually receiving an impact that was measurable from the man's mind. So this was extremely interesting stuff, and it does illustrate a point which I've always felt from my own reading, that we are connected with everything around us in a way which is extremely difficult for us to understand. But it can be seen that these, what Carl Jung used to say, there are no accidents. In other words, it's a word called synchronicity. And synchronicity is where everything is interlinked. Two different parts, and there they are, they're interlinked. And they're interlinked in a way that's not easy for us to understand, but it can be demonstrated that we are hooked up to everybody around us, not just everybody, but every living thing, and what is apparently a different form of life to the one that we consider a thinking being. We don't think of a plant as being a thinking being. And yet, here is my wife, and she tells me, when we're going along our path, and I'll end off on this, when we're going along on our path, we pass through different areas where there are coconut trees. And some of the coconut trees don't look so great. They're not apparently productive. And what does Beth say about that? She said, it's because they're not living near people and they're not cared for. They need to be cared for. So in other words, she's saying exactly what this great scientist Cleve Backsters said, that plants are affected by our thoughts. So in other words, we should really be going out and talking to those coconut trees. I imagine that we've talked to more stupid things than that. I know I have myself tried to have conversations with people who probably didn't have the IQ of a coconut tree. And I'm sure there are people out there that said the same about me, okay? So, is it possible that in the future a man might be saying to his wife, well dear, I'm going to have a busy day today because down on the south pasture there's a load of coconut trees and my God, do they need a good talking to. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. Go out and have a look at that book, because that what I've just shared with you is it's just one very short chapter. And it's actually, the subtitle is The Hidden Science and Lost Civilizations Behind the 2012 Prophecies. So you know that 2012 was supposed to be an extremely important year in our lives, in the survival of our planet, and a lot of other things, which are a whole other video. Okay, enjoy. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.